Tips for Success for Exercise Set 1.6, Diagnosing Loaded Language, from a Workbook for Arguments by Morrow and Weston. A good argument should be able to stand on the strength of its premises and the connection between these premises and the conclusion. Learning to recognize loaded language helps you avoid being taken into arguments that sound good but lack substance. Learning to recognize loaded language also helps you avoid giving arguments yourself that sound good but don't actually provide good reasons for their conclusions. Maybe we've known this person in our lives before who says lots of fancy words and they sound like they're the smartest person in any room. But if you actually know the meanings of their words, you realize that they're actually not saying anything. They're just saying a lot of gibberish. If you've ever met one of these people, this is the kind of thing that we're trying to avoid here. Loaded language comes in both negative and positive varieties. Some loaded language carries negative emotional overtones. This type of language casts the focus of the argument in a negative light. For example, calling bankers corporate pirates attempts to cast bankers in a negative light. You see how this works? Other loaded language carries positive emotional overtones. For instance, calling a camp for holding prisoners of war a pacification center makes it sound good, almost like it's a place you'd want to go on a relaxing vacation. You say, but a place for holding prisoners of war shouldn't be thought of as a positive thing. It's important to look out for both kinds of loaded language, both positive and negative. There's also a subtler form of loaded language. In these cases, the emotional power that's being used can depend on the context in which the language is being used. For instance, the term Ivy League school is not necessarily emotionally charged by itself. It just refers to one of a specific groups of American universities. However, imagine two politicians in a debate. If one says, "Now, I may not have gone to an Ivy League school like my opponent, but," the term Ivy League school suddenly has an air of elitism, right? So we see that the language has been loaded with context here in a pretty subtle way. It can make the politician's opponent seem out of touch with ordinary people. It's important to look out for subtly loaded language in these situations as well. So we see that in this circumstance, what loads the language is the context in which it's used. When it comes to suggesting less loaded ways of saying the same thing, look for terms that carry less and ideally no emotional charge. For instance, if you're talking about a Democratic politician, don't call them a member of the radical left or a do-nothing Democrat. Phrases like these mostly just play on our feelings. They don't actually have any content. Given this, most wouldn't accept these phrases as neutral descriptions. On the other hand, you shouldn't call Democratic politicians saviors of the free world either, right? This is emotionally charged in the other way. In classic political discourse, there is in fact a substantive difference between Republicans and Democrats, right? So instead, if you're going to try to talk about a Democrat politician, just say something like this. Just call them a Democratic politician. This is a nice, even, non-emotionally charged way to present the information.